good evening to Mr. President. Today we are hosting our next session of Peaceful Mind Mentors, where we bring in leaders from around the world and discuss about various relevant topics and themes which are going around in the world and which are necessary to discuss for society. And Mr. President has been really gracious to accept our invitation, and we have been in conversation. To tell you a little bit about Mr. President, I'm sure he's a very well-known figure in around the world and specifically the Asian region. He has been the former Prime Minister, former President, former UN Under Secretary General, and also a Nobel Peace Laureate for his continuous work for Timor-Leste. Mr. President, we heartily welcome you on board today, and it is our honor to host you from East Timor, and it is our gracious that you are there with us. We also have a joining of the GCC Youth Forum and the United Youth Circuit who wants to hear from you. And it's a very big youth movement which they have in the GCC, and specifically which is headquartered in London, and they operate from the UAE. So, Mr. President, before going to the topic of the conversation, which is the Asian leaders, Asian centuries, talks, realities, and myths. May I know, according to you, which I ask everybody, what according to you is leadership, and how do you think leadership has changed in this current scenario?
I think leadership, the definition, concept, and qualities of leadership do not change. If we understand leadership as an individual, someone, woman or man, who guides people, who inspires, who make decisions in good times and bad times. Mahatma Gandhi is one of the best examples in the world, in history, of what a leader is. A man of conviction, a man of humility, simplicity, but with a towering, in his smallness physically, in his humbleness, in his appearance, is a towering, overwhelming moral personality, force, strength. And it's almost like a fragile flower that everybody gather around to observe the beauty of that flower. Nelson Mandela, 27 years in prison, leaves prison, forgive his captors, his enemies, those who mistreated him, humiliate him, and promote reconciliation among all South African, black and white. So these qualities of leadership are not changeable. You know, they are perennial, they are eternal. They don't change these qualities of leadership. So that's my definition, my understanding of leadership.
So, sir, how when you are still a public figure in your country and around the world, how has your leadership role been challenging, or how challenging it was when you were at a leadership position and till today? I mean, how do you see that leadership as a challenging position for you?
Well, in my lifetime, in my public life, but also in private, in the last 20 years, through our country's troubling times, on occasion, as foreign minister, as prime minister, as president, I had to make decisions. And decisions that sometimes are uncomfortable, are difficult. What guides me in my decisions? Sometimes as president is a very lonely situation. And in that one is, it is not like you are in a parliament. The president of a parliament is a collegial body. And the president of the republic is a unipersonal, is a person, as an individual. Of course, he or she has advisors in our case, but the decision is his, is mine. And when I have to make decisions, I always think of issues of justice, issues of humanity, of compassion. I have to balance between justice, between compassion. I have to make decisions, balance between issues that I perceive also to be of a national security interest, uh, but also of the need to be compassionate. Uh, so for me, there is no dissociation. Quality of leadership is intelligence, is wisdom, balanced with compassion. Uh, a leader without this virtue of compassion for caring is bound to fail because compassion means, humility means you're connected with the people you are supposed to serve. You always have to think of what uh, matters for the common people, for what matters for the nation.
That's true. That's true. So, sir, coming to your theme of today, the Asian leaders and Asian talks. Please take us through this journey of this Asian leadership, the specific topic which you have taken today, the talks and realities. So, please guide us about and brief us about this theme of yours for today about Asian leadership.
Well, I will begin with a broader global leadership issue. COVID-19 exposes failure of global leadership and to somewhat weakness of global institutions that were created after World War II, like the United Nations and others that are associated with the United Nations, the various agencies, including WHO and others. Of course, the UN over the course of the decades adopted reform. I was chair of a United Nations high-level panel on reforms of the UN peace operations, commissioned by Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General at that time, precisely to reflect, to think, to evaluate the existing peacekeeping architecture doctrine on how to adapt it to 21st century challenges. Of course, so I would say over the years, almost every Secretary General, particularly starting with Boutros Ghali, continued by Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon and so on, they, to the best of their ability, they try to adapt the UN. But it is obviously the international security architecture, the international partnership architecture seem to have failed to anticipate a crisis like this, like the COVID-19. Because look, has there been a common consensus among the members of the UN Security Council, the G7, the G20, on how to mobilize resources and respond collectively for the benefit of all humankind? No, what you see today is literally individual countries trying to save themselves. Individual countries trying to grab as much as possible the promise of vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, if it ever comes to fruition. So this shows the lack of the failure of a global partnership, global institutions, uh, almost by everyone. Then we move to Asia. You can start with South Asia. You know, probably one of the weakest regional regional cooperation organization is South Asia, precisely because of the ongoing dispute between India and Pakistan. But then you move a bit beyond South Asia, you look at the relationship between China and India, you look at the relationship between China and Japan, Japan and South Korea. So there is a lot to do, to really have a Asia-wide leadership, Asia-wide partnership that can really lead Asia to affirm itself in the 21st century. So when I hear some Asian academics, Asian political leaders talk about 21st century, Asia century, I'm always very skeptical. Of course, if compare Asia as a whole, what it is today with what it was 50 years ago, obviously some countries in Asia have made tremendous progress in science, in technology, in reducing extreme poverty. But overall, when you look at the forces in confrontation, Asia is, I would consider it to be the most dangerous region of the world. Look at the African continent. Yeah, there have been conflicts plaguing Africa, but thanks to Nelson Mandela, when he took over as president, the first thing he did was to dismantle South African nuclear capabilities. Latin America, no one has nuclear capability. Brazil has the technology. They can produce by tomorrow. Argentina, they can do it. And in Europe, you have two ancient European powers, Asian European powers, France and the UK. But you can be certain that France and the UK, they are not pointing the nuclear weapons at each other. They might be pointing at Russia. I don't know who they're pointing to. But in Asia, you have two neighbors, India and Pakistan, obviously pointing at each other. Maybe Indian nuclear weapons pointing also as well towards China. Then you have China pointing its nuclear weapons at who? Then you have North Korea pointing its nuclear weapons at everybody else. They are ready to fire at every direction because they have seem to have only enemies, no friends. So in this situation, and where 40% of the world's poverty reside in Asia, out of population of 7, 8 billion in the world, 40 to 50% are in Asia, and 40% of world's poor are in Asia. So how can we talk of an Asia century, 21st century, with 40% of the world poverty and so much nuclear armed countries in Asia? Failure of leadership of all these countries. And I know, if we were to be true to Hinduism, if we are true to Buddhism, if you're true to Islam, if you're true to Christianity, all these religions that mesh in Asia, well, Asia should have been the most peaceful region of the world, because all great religions, philosophies began and met in Asia. Instead, it's the region with the most, I wouldn't say number of nuclear weapons, because number of nuclear weapons is the United States and Russia, but the number of countries, some of which very fragile, unpredictable, with nuclear weapons. So I'm skeptical. I hope I will not disappoint Asian friends that I'm saying this so bluntly, that I don't believe 21st century is Asia century. When we talk about the progress of Asia, we'll literally piggyback on China's progress. China, if it were not for COVID, by 2021, they would have eliminated completely extreme poverty. Only 30 million Chinese still living below poverty line. By 2021, extreme poverty would cease to exist in China. But these are official figures. You believe it or not, but these figures are matched by observation and many others. But even so, a civilization, the Asia century, cannot be only measured through GDP, through many other progress in human freedom and human achievements, through human development. And so, other than China, of course, India made tremendous progress in the last 50 years as well. But still, and I have a great admiration for India. To admire India, you have to know where it started, what the British left behind, and what the British took from India, what it was 50 years ago, or even just 20 years ago, and what it is today. More than 1 billion people. Chaotic democracy, imperfect, but Which democracy is not chaotic? Look at American democracy. I think, when you compare Indian democracy with the United American democracy, Indian democracy seem to be like totally peaceful, totally organized democracy. Uh, and yet, in this vast country, more than 1 billion people, diverse ethnicity, religion, well, democracy has survived in India. It has survived every challenge. So that's the difference between China and India.
True, true. So, sir, as you said that you're skeptical about the Asian century in the 21st century because there's still a lot of work to do. If one thing you would have to suggest to the Asian leaders, just as a person, as a third person living in the Asian region, what would you suggest? I mean, how can we make it as an Asian century? Since you say that all religions coincide here, and we could have been the most peaceful continent in the world. What could be done?
I would say, of course, easier said than done. Because if it was easier, they wouldn't need me to say so because they would have done it already. But ideally would be if Asian leaders of today meet in a summit, set up an Asian fund for the 21st century. Because 50 years ago, Asia didn't have money, liquidity, not even science and technology. Today, it has almost everything. Asia has the most liquidity in the world, the most cash in the world, the most wealth in the world. It has scientists, some of the greatest economies in the world. Well, couldn't they set aside temporarily the border problems, set aside the fight over South China Sea, and work on what you agree, work on what you don't disagree. And what you don't disagree is Asia has to eliminate extreme poverty. It's a matter of Asia's humanity. So you set aside a fund, an Asia fund for 21st century. Goal number one, get rid of extreme poverty through better education for all, education that is adapted to 21st century, an education that creates self-employment, employment, that preserves the environment, an education, an investment that clean up the rivers, the lakes, the seas that Asians themselves destroy. Because when you hear some Asian politicians talk, including India, always blame the West. Yes, the West is responsible. But also India has done its share in damaging the environment. China has done its share throughout Asia, including in my little own country. I keep castigating our people when I see garbage everywhere. I say, listen, don't blame the Americans. I haven't seen an American, a Chinese dumping garbage in our streets. It's you, us, young people doing it, not the other. So we are all at fault. And we all have benefited from the European Industrial Revolution that brought benefit and brought bad consequences. So stop blaming others. Asia focus on what Asia can do to pull out hundreds of millions of Asians out of poverty, to bring clean water to every household, to eliminate extreme poverty, to eliminate illiteracy. And that can be done. Put aside the border dispute, India and Pakistan, India and China. Put aside the South China Sea dispute because it's a serious problem. I just wouldn't know how to handle North Korea, but I would say North Korea is going to be the next nuclear power, or it already is. It's going to be part of the club, whether we like it or not. And why North Korea is doing that? Well, result of World War II. They learned a lesson. They learned from Libya when Gaddafi eliminated, the surrender nuclear capability. What they did was to kill him. and Iran enter into agreement with the United Nations and the Americans themselves, come a new president, and threaten to blow up Iran. Well, are you going to convince North Korea not to have to surrender nuclear capabilities when you see what is done to Iran, what they did to Gaddafi? Well, so I don't know what to do with North Korea. I'm just saying, inevitable that North Korea will be another nuclear power. And what does that mean? The temptation is South Korea, feeling threatened, needs a deterrence. It cannot rely entirely on American deterrence. So it also goes nuclear. Japan, fearful, decide also to go nuclear. And how about Taiwan? And how about Iran? So what a catastrophe. So I would say maybe someone, maybe Prime Minister Modi, make an extra effort, talk to Xi Jinping, they have a summit, resolve the ugly dispute, and then maybe the two together call on other agents to meet in a summit. And I think it's possible to come up with this blueprint because by working on issues that you don't disagree on, you might then next step move on addressing the issues you disagree on. You start with those you agree, build confidence, and people will look at the dividends out of it. Anyway, you asked for my suggestion. I shouldn't even say so because many in India who might be listening to me, they say, well, if it was that easy, we'd have done it already. So,
sir, these bodies like African Union, CARICOM, Pacific Island Forum, United Nations. So can there be a body like Asian Union?
yeah, I was going to say precisely. Asia is so disunited, there is not an Asia-wide union like the African Union.
Yeah.
The African Union in the last 20 years has become one of the most effective regional organizations. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe many people look at it as a laughing stock. But no, they have made tremendous progress. Even on human rights observance and the punishment of human rights violators, punishment of military or anyone who does orchestrate a military coup. They have been forceful in dealing with these situations. Asia, even on some of the most mild issues of human rights, individual freedoms, well, you don't hear much of progress in this area. European Union obviously is one of the perfected organization, maybe too much, and the people are rebelling against it. Maybe they went too far in the union, they went too far in a single currency, but it is a unique international body. I wouldn't argue that Asia should follow European Union model, no. Just please set up a political body like African Union. Yeah. That would be all right, but we don't even have that. And the sub-region organizations of all in the whole of Asia region, the one that is most credible, prestigious is ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. When there is an ASEAN summit every year, we see all major powers descend on the capital where they are holding, whether in Bali, Jakarta, Hanoi, or Bangkok, wherever. You see the Russian president, American president, the European Union, Japanese, Korean, Indian prime minister, all descend to the summit, travel to the summit to have bilateral meetings with the ASEAN leaders. There's only one. You don't see any other regional body, even the European Union, when they have their annual conclave,
Yeah.
You don't see the American president rushing in, the Indian prime minister or whatever. So
Yeah.
ASEAN, with its 600 million people, with an economy that already in the trillions of dollars, is the most prestigious. But it doesn't mean ASEAN is free of problems. Look at Myanmar, the problem in Myanmar, part of Philippines. Uh, so it's still problematic, but it is the most effective organization in the Asia region.
Yes. Um, that was really, really something path breaking. I will bring on the first question, sir, from Mr. Shubhan. Mr. Shubhan, you are here.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Professor.
Shubhan, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, of course. Hello, Dr. Ramos Horta. It's an honor to hear from you from across various countries and across the borders. The question which I want to propose to you is one is we have in the recent times we have noticed that the East have been not in proper collaboration with the West, with the U.S.-China trade dispute, with a lot of with a lot of discrepancies in how the East has been thinking as compared to the West. What I would like to ask you is, we have been holding peace talks, we have been negotiating, we have been doing discussions with the leaders, but as United Nations is a body, it has not been able to deep dive into how the governments can come forward and influence each other and work out a proper forum or work out a proper collaboration. I wanted to ask how can UN deep dive more into the government so that the decision making process becomes better, because what we have noticed is the United Nations has not been in the forefront. Rather, it has let governments do their job, which has not created such a proper understanding between everybody. How do you think UN can improve over the years? It's been 70 years since the United Nations has been formed. How can UN transform into the next 70?
Okay, well, I would say it this way. When current Secretary General Antonio Guterres was elected and sworn in, it was the same month that he was sworn in. Literally, he began January 1st, 2017, and with President Donald Trump. And so it was very unfortunate for Secretary General Antonio Guterres to begin his mandate as Secretary General with someone, President Trump, to the multilateral system, very hostile to the United Nations. And so it's extremely difficult for any Secretary General of the United Nations to be able to help, let's say, in mediating conflicts like in Syria, when regional powers, major global powers themselves do not heed the very same resolutions they agree to or they don't even agree to, and continue to support different sides in a conflict. It's extremely difficult for the Secretary General to do anything about it. The UN, except for the humanitarian side of the UN role in Syria and Yemen, the major powers almost literally sideline the United Nations. And we see it time again in the conflict in Syria. So I would say the UN is a constellation of member states, of countries, of India and many others. If member states of the UN, leaders of the UN, of these states, do not have the wisdom and the humility, the courage to engage in dialogue, either directly, bilateral, or regional, or through the United Nations, and invite the Secretary General to assist, well, we cannot blame the UN. The Secretary General can make every reform he wants, or he's demanded to make. It's not going to be a substitute for the responsibility of member states. It's as simple as that.
Shubhan
Right.
is
Right,
it?
of course. Thank you so much, sir, for deep diving into this. I just had a follow-up question on something which is regional. We have noticed that over time, Timor-Leste has been on a maritime dispute with Australia, and you have been on the forefront of the country for a very long time now. how has your view changed, and how is Timor-Leste placed now in terms of resolving this dispute, and are we moving ahead in a positive direction? What is your take on it?
Well, let me say, credit goes entirely to my friend and colleague, the main leader of the country, Mr. Shanana Guzmão. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture here of him to show you. He is an absolutely charismatic person. He is the one who pushed for the negotiations with Australia. Initially, Australia refused. He persisted, mobilized international support, Australian public opinion support. In the end, Australia, a democratic country with a people, a society, Australian people who are very fair-minded. You also have to understand people. And the Australian people, sometimes separate from the government, are extremely fair-minded. They are very sensitive about the underdog because of their own history. You know, convicts that came from UK, from Ireland, from Scotland, sent to build that massive continent, used and abused by the British Crown. And they, the common people, are traditionally, historically very sensitive to causes of the underdog. So public opinion also had a part in pushing the Australian government to accept a United Nations mediation on the border dispute. In the end, we succeeded, and we showed, as Australia and the United Nations, that in border disputes, maritime disputes, or any dispute of any nature, it is possible to find a solution when there is leadership on the countries, on all sides, to find a solution that is honorable, that is beneficial to all sides. So that is the lesson of Timor-Leste. And even myself, I had difficulties believing that Australia is going to back down, because they said from 20 years ago, they are not going to back down. In the end, they did. And so it shows also a statesmanship on the part of the Australians.
Yes.
Because Australia is the major power. If they had said no and no, well, no amount of pressure. So I would say credit to our leader, Shanana Guzmão, credit to the Australian, and credit to the United Nations. So after all, the UN is still extremely important, but leaders accept a United Nations mediation role.
True. So very well. Shubhan, are you satisfied now?
Yes. Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightenment. I guess Timor-Leste's example is very good, and it's a perfect example for countries to mediate peace and to solve disputes. That is the reason why I wanted everyone to understand this particular example over the globe. Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightenment.
Great, Shubhan. Sir, we are just going to take two more questions, please, if you agree. Ashutosh, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Ashutosh, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, good evening, Your Excellency. It's a pleasure and honor to hear from you. My question is lies from a very, starting from the past to coming to the present. I had the privilege of having a bilateral meeting on behalf of UNMSAM with the Foreign Minister of Iran last year. And he told me one of the things which I still remember is that the countries in Asia and Middle East, you can say, they have a very high desperation to seize power. And you can see it as example as, let's say, if you say Saudi Arabia, you can see India, China, and even Pakistan is a partner in crime in that. And when you see these situations starting from, United States selling the weapons to Saudi Arabia, and, currently, recently, there are 5 jets deal from France to India. We can see a lot of desperation, rather say Asian countries and Middle East have to seize power. And what Mr. Sajjad Puri said, that this desperation of power can really have serious consequences, because when you see the past with the United States and Russia, we all know what was the aftermath of it. And what do you think currently when we think about these perspectives? are this desperation of power between Asian countries, when you can see, is going to be the destruction of our own?
Well, Asia is not unique in the sense, if I understood well your question, in arming itself. Asian countries throughout to arm themselves, but so are countries in the Middle East, so is the United States, so is Russia. They're perfecting more and more their nuclear capabilities. I just wrote something a few hours ago in my page on the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world powers, instead of disassembling their nuclear arsenal, they have acquired more and ever more sophisticated. India and Pakistan can destroy each other many times over. Russia and the United States can destroy each other many times over. And when I watch this explosion in Beirut, an accident probably, of someone stockpiling more than 2,000 tons of explosives in a port in the middle of a city, I thought, it is not inconceivable that one of these days there is a nuclear arsenal somewhere in one of the nuclear powers that goes up in flames. And can we imagine the consequences of it? Well, let's not forget Chernobyl of many years ago. And let's not forget Fukushima. It was civilian nuclear reactor for civilian use. Came the tsunami and had tremendous impact on Japan, particularly in the seas surrounding Japan. So then, of course, the conventional weapons. I move on to conventional weapons. Well, the United States, UK, and other countries talk a lot about human rights, impose sanctions on Iran, impose sanctions on China, because on Cuba, supposedly because of human rights. Well, without wanting to offend anyone in Saudi Arabia is not exactly a observant of human rights. Maybe it's even worse than Iran, worse than Cuba. And yet, no hesitation on the part of the United States, even Canada, or any European countries to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. But even some of the smaller countries in the Gulf region, they arm themselves to teeth. And this is, it shows a bit of lack of failure of leadership in that unable to choose the path of dialogue to settle whatever dispute they have, to eliminate mutual suspicion, is when people don't engage in dialogue, leaders don't engage in dialogue at every level, then you start believing in rumors. You start believing in fake news that create suspicion. And when you suspect your neighbor, you start arming yourself. So the transaction of conventional weapons and the enormous amount of money spent on conventional weapons by many third world countries, it is to the detriment of education, of health, of the environment. And hardly any of these weapons have saved us from COVID-19. COVID-19, invisible enemy, destroyed economies around the world, paralyzed everyone from traveling, from destroyed the supply chain. And what happened to all these weapons, nuclear weapons? Well, totally useless. Are we going to use them to kill each other after COVID? So I would ask the nuclear powers, the powers that develop conventional weapons and sell them, please reflect. Maybe it's time for us to change completely and begin disarmament. Serious, not only nuclear weapons, but conventional weapons, because no one has died yet of nuclear weapons, but millions have died of conventional weapons sold by the West, by Russia, to countries in Africa, Middle East, and elsewhere. Anyway, this sounds almost like a keynote speech, so instead of answering your simple question. My apologies.
No. Sir, I have a question here. Ashutosh, if you don't mind, I continue your question. I just have one,
Sure, I have a follow-up question. You can do it after. Yeah, look, you can do it after you're done. Yeah.
Okay, so sir said that that we have to move in terms of dialogues and cooperations and all. So, sir, when we talk about dialogues and mutual cooperation, we obviously every leader engages in a dialogue and mutual cooperation within countries and international borders. Why doesn't the result still come out? Is it because that we do not want to work on our disagreements with each other?
Well, difficult, I cannot answer your question in a simplistic fashion without running the risk of being ridiculed. There are no, seem to be a simple question, but it's on a complex issue. You deal with real national pride, national interest, or perception of national interest. You deal with domestic politics. I give an example, South China Sea. It's almost an insoluble problem. No country, no claimant state is going to relinquish their claim. China is not going to relinquish it. Any leader in the claimant state that might back down, relinquish a claim, will no longer be in office. And I don't think he or she wants to be the person, the leader, who relinquish the claims. So what you have to do in the South China Sea? Well, find common ground. Common ground is what? Well, look at what you can do to work together in the South China Sea. And China itself as an aspiring global power, it is already a global power, at least financially it is, economically it is. Well, it has to show wisdom, it has to show humility, it has to show pragmatism. And maybe China is the one who should take the first steps towards accommodating the other 5, 6 countries claimant state to South China Sea. Without that, well, there will be always a lingering suspicion of China. And China and India have to put aside their current differences, and as I said earlier, work on achievable, work on issues that you can agree on. And by doing that, after a period, you gain enough trust of each other, you might start tackling the more complicated issues. So as I go back to the same, work on education, on extreme poverty, on saving, cleaning the environment, because the environment affects all of us. Affect China, affect India, affect the health of hundreds of millions of people. So other than that, it's very difficult to answer your question in a TV program.
No, sir. I think I got your point. There is one question which has come to us in a chat box. Ashutosh, please, this person is waiting for a very long time. Can you name a person who has had a tremendous impact on you as a leader? Why and how did this person impact your life? It's a question by Meera Samir.
Well, let me say, I cannot, of course, I'm one of the greatest fan of Mahatma Gandhi. Maybe I'm not as humble. I cannot say I'm not as humble as Mahatma Gandhi. I wish I was as humble as him. I wish I were able to live as simply as he did live. I wish I had his mind, his vision. I'm far, far below that. But I say, well, and I cannot say he impacted my life, because if he impacted on my life, I would have been as humble as him. And but I'm an admirer, huge admirer. And I would say there are things we can learn from Mahatma Gandhi as leaders, and that is to be humble, to be compassionate. There is no other greater qualities in a leader than being humble. And the greatest leaders are precisely those, because if you are super brilliant, you are an Einstein, well, you can afford to be very humble. If you're very powerful, you can afford to be very humble. It doesn't cost you much. And, uh, and when you are humble and you are compassionate, yes, you are addressing issues that affect people's lives. So for me, it's Mahatma Gandhi. But there are other leaders in the world, in history, Martin Luther King, the Kennedys. I'm one of the greatest admirers of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and many others. But number one, yes, Mahatma Gandhi. I wouldn't say Mandela is number two. Maybe the two are Mahatma Gandhi. I never met. Obviously, I was too young, and but I met Mandela more than once, and I was I met a living, towering figure, and and Mandela has this quality of compassion.
Yes.
Through compassion, that he launched the reconciliation process in South Africa. If he didn't, maybe South Africa would be, instead of celebrating freedom from apartheid, they would begin a new cycle of violence between blacks and whites.
Yes. That was actually inspiring Mahatma Gandhi and His Excellency Nelson Mandela. Anybody has any other point to add to what His Excellency has just said? Otherwise, we conclude his session because I think it's getting night in Timor-Leste. Anybody has
There
any?
are two hands.
And I'm Hussein Mohammed Ali from Somalia. So thank you very much indeed for this program. And I'm really very appreciated for the co-hostess of this program. Excuse me if my voice is slow. I see that Mr. President is just laying on his air. Dear President, I want to ask you a question about the government program and the use. When it comes to Somalia, we know that Somalia occupies 75% of people living in Somalia are almost youth. So how possible and better it is to have a use for the political issue or political participation? What suggestion would you use to participate in the political concern or political? I mean, I know it is very important for the youth to participate for the political issue, while a country whose youth are almost 75% occupies in the country. So as you already mentioned it, you have mentioned it, a very important person in the world like Mahatma Gandhi. He was really a hero man who has a great history in the history of in the world. So when it comes to Somalia, as you know, Somalia was a very terrible crisis for the past 30 years of war. So the federal government of Somalia was, collapsed in 1991, and at that day up to now, there is no good government in Somalia. So my question is, how can the youth take part for the political issue in the globe, especially Somalia? Thank you very much, dear President.
I'm familiar with Somalia only marginally. Of course, I follow over the years from the time of the Cold War. I met many great Somali people in the United States, in Australia, here in my own country, in Timor-Leste. I have a very, I have no comment or prescription, least of all prescription for Somalia. As you know, the African Union, with enormous courage, when the United Nations, the Americans abandoned Somalia, it was the African Union with extreme difficulties, extreme cost to them that intervene there. And I don't know, I don't argue whether that intervention was right or wrong, but it required a lot of courage on the part of the African Union. And all costs were covered by the African Union, the peacekeeping that African Union deployed to Somalia. And then, of course, the European Union then took over the expenses of the African Union forces in Somalia. But as we know, the approach to Somalia or any other conflict situation cannot be one-sided military approach. It cannot be only a security dimension. And even more in a situation like Somalia, that's extremely complicated, is tribal-based, clan-based, with a lot of external interests involved. So the only solution, the possible solution, is for the African Union, the League of Arab States, the European Union, continue to persist. And there are no easy solution to Somalia. And what does that mean? It means we have to be persistent. Yes, it's been going on for decades. Well, be it. It has to continue. There is no other solution. To continue to try to have a dialogue, to bring, to fashion a unity government. I know there have been attempts in the past, as it has been attempts in Syria under the United Nations. There has been failure already for almost 10 years, the conflict. And I'd say, you know, there are some conflicts that go on forever. People will die. People are dying. I'm not going to make politically correct speeches, correct answers to say banality, to say cliches. The reality is there are conflicts that go on and on until one day a solution is found. Look at the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, more than 1 million people killed. And only then, after 8 years, the two sides exhausted, the two countries began peace talks and ended the Iran-Iraq war. Then, of course, came the Gulf War, the invasion of Kuwait, and so on. But they ended that war that cost more than 1 million people. So Somalia belongs to this situation of conflicts like Syria that will take forever. And frankly, I apologize to you that I am not able to give you a better explanation, better answer. I feel obviously totally, I'd say, ignorant about it.
That was very well said. I think Engineer Hussain, you are fine with it now? Yes. So we conclude this session. Before just leaving, could I ask everybody to please switch on their cameras so that we can have a quick picture with His Excellency? I will click the picture for everybody so that everybody can please switch on their cameras. I'll switch it off because I'll have to click the picture for everybody. And thank you, Mr. President, for sparing your valuable time today. I know you're very, very, very busy. And indeed an honor to listen to you. Only one takeaway which I had, and apart from many others, is that we have to work on what we disagree to come to a consensus to make Asia proud and to make an Asian century in later time to come. And I'm really thankful for this speech of yours, sir. Thank you to GCC Youth Forum joining us from the UAE and the United Youth Circuit. Ambassador Ashutosh, thank you for all your cooperation which we had for making this session successful. Before leaving, we were live on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Please, you can take the videos from there. The video would be edited and put on the YouTube channel of Peaceful Mind. Tanvi is there to cooperate and coordinate with the video part. Our next session would be on the 16th of September with the former president of Bosnia and Herzegovina, His Excellency Mladen, and he would be speaking about the European part of dealing with crisis. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Jose, and I'm really, really, really honored to have you. Thank you. Take care, be safe, and take care of your health. See you. Bye-bye.